This is the second part of my conversation with Bruno Ciscato of R3. If you haven't seen the first conversation and you would like to have a look at that, you'll there get a bit of a crash course in blockchain and distributed ledger technology. This conversation, the second part, is really focused on use cases of blockchain beyond cryptocurrencies. Bruno gives us several use cases that also his firm R3 with the Corda blockchain protocol is involved in. Very interesting, very intriguing. He also tells us a bit about CBDC projects that he's involved in. He can't get too specific there, but he definitely gives us enough hints to make it all very interesting and intriguing, and we definitely live in interesting times and on the verge of big change. I hope you enjoy this conversation. You can watch us on YouTube or Spotify, or also we have these conversations at our website. So enjoy, and I hope to see you there. So help us, trigger our fantasies of use cases that you see currently. For example, in your book of business with Corda, what are the use cases that that people can think of to understand why we're excited about blockchain still? DLT being a tool and a technology that can solve a lot of issues down the road.
I'll give you some examples so I can get you a bit excited, but then I will explain why we should be way more excited than that, okay? So let's take it in two steps, and I will explain why. Mm-hmm. So, for example, in Japan, we have another application which is a digital currency for local governments. So after the pandemic, as in many other places, the local governments in Japan were trying to boost the local economy, and this is somewhat related to the pandemic, but it's also independent from the pandemic. Now that a lot of people shop online, for example, in the UK it's called the high street shops, which is like the small shops in your local community are struggling because they don't see as much business as they used to. So Japanese local governments wanted to find ways to boost the local economy. So they came up with this concept that was paper-based before, now it's based on blockchain, where you can sign up for this program, this scheme, and then you get a wallet, a digital wallet, and then you can top it up. So maybe you add 1,000 yen, and then the local government will add 20% more on top of that, or 50% more.
So they're trying to stimulate that,
yes, exactly.
the use of that technology.
Yes. And then stimulate is the key word, because the risk is that people end up hoarding that money because they are insecure about the future.
As a piece of savings, basically.
Yes, so you're not stimulating anything. So now you're trying to do parachute money, but actually it's very hard to implement it because people can use that money, and like I said, they can just put it in the bank account. Now that, since they're using this Corda base, which is a distributed ledger based technology that allows for all this innovation, actually the government can put an expire date on that money.
Oh, so they say you have to use it until a certain date.
Yes.
So interesting.
And plus they also add another restriction. You can only use...
They add what?
An additional restriction. So you can only use the money in participating shops, which are the local tiny mom and pop shops.
So they're trying to support those mom and pop
yes.
shops.
You can't go online and buy
chains.
From an international big chain in Japan.
Okay.
So, and then the merchants have a back-end system where they can go online and they can decide to redeem that virtual currency for fiat money.
So this is a different payment system though again, right? Which is, it then allows the local government basically to have an influence, because to some degree, it's not a CBDC, it's a central bank digital, because it's not the central bank, it's a LG DC,
yes,
local government
it's very
digital
close.
currency.
It's very close. You can provide a blueprint for what CBDC may be.
Right. So they're using that approach. Other use cases like that.
So, well, one of my favorite one is aXedras that you just mentioned, because it's very different. It has nothing to do with money or payments, but it's a good example of the how useful it is to have like just one shared view of the world. So aXedras is a company that's built a very interesting solution for tracking the provenance and also the supply chain of gold bullions. And the way it works.
So just as a disclaimer, I have to tell everyone that I didn't ask you to talk about this.
Yes.
aXedras, you know, we started that company, and it's gone very far, and that's where we work together. And it's always been great because you've been very supportive from the very beginning, and I know you are a bit of a fan of aXedras, so I don't want to stop you from talking about it. I just want to make sure everyone knows that we're involved in that.
Yes, no, a bit of a fan is an understatement, because I'm a huge fan of aXedras. Because, I mean, this is something that I think most people have come across, even in the early stages of blockchain, where really people were seeing the potential of using blockchain as a distributed ledger, a way to keep a whole industry on the same page. And why is that important? And why aXedras have done such a good job? Because it just doesn't exist. So we have this perception that now that everything is managed by computer programs, and it's stored in databases, everything is like in sync and everyone has the right information, which is not true at all. It's wrong. I'm pretty sure that everyone has got some like weird like mail in the post because a big company, maybe a utility, had the wrong mixed up names with addresses. It happened to me more than once. There are companies that are specializing in sorting out these mismatches between databases. And we're talking within a single company. Now, if we start talking like between companies, that just doesn't
Global
exist.
Yeah.
So if you think about it, IT, computer science, is a very young discipline. I mean, we have been building bridges for like thousands of years. We have been building like railroads for a couple of hundreds of years. But computers, they've been around only for about 50 years. And they became mainstream with the PC in the 80s. So it's relatively young. And although there's been a lot of progress within companies where you can mandate from the top down, we are going to use this system. This is our system of record. And even then, they're not super accurate because, I mean, sometimes they don't work perfectly. Between companies, there's been very, very little integration.
So when we started aXedras, maybe to explain a bit for those who are not familiar with aXedras, what aXedras really, the original idea was really one to create, I'll use a term that you used earlier, a digital twin of a physical asset, a gold bar. And why would you want to do that is in order to then allow for more efficient transactions, you know, let's say relocations, vault entries and exits, the moment of the birth of that gold bar. You know, when a refiner creates a gold bar, it's created on a certain date, it has a certain format, has a certain fineness and a bar number, and then that bar goes out and circulates. And at this point, as that bar circulates, the information that is shared between the participants on that bar is kept, is shared on a very paper-heavy basis in many cases. You know, you do have some vertically integrated supply chains where it's more automated and digitized, but in general, there's no digital standard at this point to share, to interface, to create certainty as to the background and the attributes of that gold bar. You know, a very simple example I can give that, you know, was originally when you start a business, you want to think about the pain points. You know, what are the pain points, what's not working, and how can I kind of address those pain points is, for example, paper certificates. Today in the vaults, gold bars have paper certificates, you know, and so those certificates are supposed to play a role in creating more security for the owner, but actually a piece of paper can be copied very easily. Yep. And the problem with gold bars moving around in a warehouse is that the paper doesn't necessarily always follow the bar, right? So a bar has this shape, and if it's 50 bars, what happens is the certificates are put in a folder and put on top of that palette, right? So now the bars move around. Now you have to go and get those pieces of paper out. That just gives you an idea of how archaic, to some degree, those certificates are. And if you look at the overall industries, there's a lot of that. And at the same time, you have the pain point or the need for more quick auditability and compliance. And that's where a digital standard can really make a huge difference. Now the question is, what kind of technology do you use for that digital standard? And that's where Corda came in for me. Because instead of using a centralized database that is maybe controlled by some association or regulator, that would not work in that industry. Because everyone in that industry would say, oh, I don't trust them keeping my data private. So that was where aXedras started originally. And then it became a long story, and we're the team is pushing very hard. But I think the point that you like a lot, at least the way you explained it, has to do with the fact that it's a use case where the industry itself is very deeply involved. I think that's how you explained it at one point.
It's not only deeply involved, but it gets a lot of benefit out of this industry-wide system of record. It is important because the thing that you just said very powerful, because allow people to visualize what happens, like with a folder with the paper in it that can be misplaced. It doesn't go along with the gold bullions. But what does that mean as a consequence for the company? Two things. One is that is inefficient when it goes well, because being paper-based, there is a lot of work that people need to do. But also, so that is one aspect, it is inefficient. The other one is that when you have to then copy that information into different systems, it goes across systems, there is potential for mistakes. And mistakes can cost a lot.
Absolutely.
So actually one of the people that attended your conference 3 years back.
In Engelberg.
Yes, it was super nice. I was sitting next to a person that was from one of the logistic companies. And he gave me a good example. He said, Bruno, you don't realize the risk and the value that is involved in a simple transfer of some gold bullions from a vault to a different location. And if we get the wrong destination address, and we have to send the truck back, and we have to send it out the day after, the risk...
If it's shipped to the wrong address.
Yes. Yeah. It may, first of all, it may go down like a dark alley in a bad place, or maybe even if it goes back and it has to go back out the day after, the financing or the insurance that we need to take out to make sure that it's properly handled has a huge cost. And if you multiply it at the industry level, so that is such an amazing example of the value that you derive from an industry-wide system of record, where there is only one place where you have that destination address, and you know that it's the right one. Because it hasn't been copied multiple times in the wrong feed, in the wrong system. So, and since there aren't any industries that have this system.
So on that example, just to again explain why, how the system then works, or why a digital standard can be very helpful, is the fact that if everyone uses that digital standard, that means that basically you're using a set of data, a set of information on a gold bar, which includes when was that gold bar born, who created it, what's the weight, where did the gold come from, which vaults has the bar been at. That kind of information, obviously, if you don't have a data standard that kind of digitally tracks it and records it, all that information is lost. And then you're back in that state of, if someone asks, well, where did that bar come from? Or, where was that bar before? Was it in Russia? Or was it in the UK? Those are questions that you, who want to keep or hold that gold bar, wants to know about. Getting that information, if it's all paper-based, is very difficult, because with each movement, with each transaction, the information is truncated, it's changed, it can be erroneously entered. If we look at some of the online systems in the warehousing systems that exist today, very often what you'll see is a 1 kilogram bar, maybe cast, and if you're lucky, you'll get the brand. that's not necessarily, even there. So it's very rudimentary information that you get when you log into some of those logistics. You'll get the bar number is very important. But ultimately, what you don't see is it minted or cast is not necessarily always there. Who created it? Because very often what you'll have is, let's say a bar is created by aXedras, but it's branded with the UBS brand, so you don't really know where did that bar come from. One of the missing information pieces, which is very important, is the fact that aXedras may create a bar, but it may not know when that bar is terminated. So now you have a bar that is out there with a number and an identity. It's people know, oh, there was this bar, but it may be refabricated or melted by someone else. So it's much easier for people to come into the market with forgeries. If you have, like you said, that system of records, which provides accounting, a ledger of checks and balances, now you have a situation where you will see that that bar was terminated. So if a new bar comes in, or if a bar is then registered on the system, it will say, hey, wait a minute, this is weird. That bar was terminated. It should only exist once. Or if a bar is already in the system, it's been registered, and another one comes along, now you have duplicates. And so that's where the technology of blockchain can be really, really powerful, in that those records are immutable. If you have the traffic, now you have a data standard for an industry, and I think that principle could be used across many industries.
Yeah, in many industries. And the reason why I like this specific use case so much is that what you just described is a lens itself at also providing, you can also provide explanations of other aspects of blockchain technology. So what you just said is super important, but there is even more than that, because if you think about it, for the logistic company, what matters to them is that they have the right address, okay? But once they have delivered that gold bar, they don't care about it anymore. So for them, what is important is that there is an industry-wide, level record, system of record, but they're only interested in a snapshot in time, which is today. Where do I need to go today to deliver that bar? But the ledger preserves all the history of all those things that have ever happened. So when the bullion was created, when it was terminated, where it went that day. And once you have that back history as well, which is what we call backchain, you can have other benefits. You can apply it to other use cases. One that comes to mind, which is obvious, is that now, finally, you have a way to back up your ESG claims. Now, ESG is a huge topic these days. So all the environmental and governance aspect. So people are kind of whitewashing a lot of it, but even the good actors that are doing it in good faith, and they're claiming that, for example, you should buy my product because we are offsetting our carbon footprint, then they are struggling with providing the data that can actually back up those claims. Because exactly outside of the boundary of the organization, they can't really prove that what their suppliers are telling them is actually true.
At least not efficiently.
So
for example, in the case of gold and in many other cases, the documentation and the auditing and everything is very intense. But in the end, then producing that proof where it comes from is very cumbersome.
Yes.
And ESG, I think, is a great example. I think ESG is one of those things which comes with great intentions. And has a purpose of, building creating rules to build a better world, and do that in different dimensions. ESG is also a bureaucratic monster, because basically you're now trying to, in a very technocratic way, create rules of exclusion or selection or ratings and risks and so on. And you're right that around that, a whole industry, especially in the financial services industry, a whole industry has been created. And I think the more it is being marketed, the larger. It's actually had quite a bit of a setback. But there's a lot of greenwashing. there's a lot of claims, like you say, where product funds claim certain things which, in my view, cannot be proven, and in many cases are just marketing.
Yeah.
And that creates a bad stigma for that. And so what you're saying is, with proper blockchain usage, you could actually create a situation where we don't drown in bureaucracy. We have efficient ways of
Yes.
proving, and we're also creating much more transparency. And we talk about that a lot in terms of calling it, instead of ESG or something, we really use the term product integrity. Which product integrity basically meaning that what you claim, what you're selling, what your marketing brochure says, should in fact be what's in that product. And proving that is difficult or is cumbersome unless you have it digitized to some degree. And digitized in a way where it's not, the data and the information has not been tinkered with. And that's one big problem with ESG today, is that a lot of the information, let's say for example on the social or governance element, comes from annual financial statements and things like that. So it's like, how trustworthy is that? It's
yeah, exactly.
So that's a huge issue there. Yeah.
Yeah, which creates a big problem, because not only you may end up trusting people that don't deserve the trust, but also the good player are struggling in the current system. Because again, I've learned this from aXedras, because there was in this case was a miner from I think was from South America, and it's not a huge mining operation, but they were doing everything as well as they could, so they were really like environmental conscious. But the problem is that they didn't have an industry-wide accepted way of proving that actually they were really, really, really good. So they were competing with other people that maybe were not that good, but they could make up stuff, because there isn't yet an industry-wide accepted way of proving what you're claiming. So
one of the problems of ESG or that kind of thinking is also that so this mine that for example you explain is they're doing everything they can to make sure that people are not hurt by things like mercury. They use mercury properly and so on. And however, it's difficult from one day to the next to have a perfect world. So what happens is that the danger exists that those that are not yet in the perfect state of doing the business are going to be excluded. And in the case of ASMs, artisanal mines, the danger then becomes that if you don't meet those standards that are now set, you may be on the way to get there and you're trying to make a living, but you haven't met those standards. If you're then excluded from reaching, for example, from being able to send your gold to a Swiss refiner, now you're in a situation where you're going to have to sell your gold to the Chinese refiner. And the Chinese refiner may actually pay you a lot less than what the Swiss refiner would pay you. So to some degree, the pressure also by NGOs to kind of say, oh, you are buying gold from mines that are not properly regulated and so on. Again, good intentions, but we also have to watch out that we then don't hurt people that actually are trying to make a living and are trying to move in the right direction, like the example you stated. And there again, I think a good standards, digitalized, can create new opportunities for those kinds of mines, because they can show progress, for example, more easily. Otherwise, how are they going to prove that they're trying to do the right thing? It's going to be very cumbersome and too expensive for the refiners who buy the gold to actually do all that work. So what are the refiners going to do? They're either going to invest and oversee certain ASMs, because that's to help, and a lot of them do that. But with a large part of their business, they're just going to say, well, I guess I can't buy gold from Dubai or from Peru or whatever, and we're just going to buy from the big players because they are properly regulated. So yeah, there's ESG has a lot of, I don't want to go off on that tangent too much, but I think there's again, like you said before, there's pros and cons of ESG, which yeah, I'm not a great fan of ESG. The way it's being used or pushed today, I think there's a lot to say for responsibility and for doing business properly, but I'm not sure the approach with that somewhat technocratic approach with taxonomies and so on is the right way. I have reservations, let's say that much, yeah.
Yeah, but at least now you potentially have a technology that will allow people to create
might allow a better,
industry-wide system of records. Yeah. Then there are other use cases that we may discuss, but what I really want to do next is really stimulate your imagination, because I'll give you an example of what happened to me 20 years ago, actually over the last 20, 30 years. And so when you ask me, okay, get us excited with all these use cases, there is only so much I can do, because the best I can imagine now is going to be nothing compared to what will actually happen. And this has already happened in the past with the internet. So we started this conversation with my background. So I was doing was the CTO, one of the first internet service providers. Then I want to work for Cisco. And Cisco back in the 90s was like the biggest player in that space. It was the computer networking vendor that got the biggest share of the market. So I was working at Cisco. And toward the end of the 90s, we aired our first commercial on TV in the US. And we got all very excited, because that made us very, very proud. And I was able to find a copy on the internet. So it's, first of all, it's a kind of square. It's not like the 16:9 ratio that we're used to these days. It was like the older one. And it's a low resolution. And so, I don't know, you might remember it. Some people probably will remember it. And so there were a bunch of kids that would say every 2 weeks, the equivalent of some country population gets on the internet. So because it was just happening back then. And then we end that commercial, or maybe it was 20 seconds, 30 seconds, with a prediction about the future. And we said, and it still gives me the goosebumps, we said, long distance calls will be a thing of the past. That prediction was...
When was that?
That was maybe 1998, it was late 90s.
You mean the costs involved and the basically the... the quality of the call.
The cost and the quality, but mainly the cost.
Because now it's we're having long distance calls all the time, even with video, and it looks like the person is in the same room. So
we don't call it long distance call because we don't even have the concept of long distance anymore, because we are all in the same space. But back in the day, for people that weren't there, so for example, when I was in the US, I told you that I was there where all this started. I used to call my girlfriend only once a week, and she would call me the alternate week because it was so expensive. So I could only get on the phone with her for 5 minutes once a week, and we would split the cost by doing it alternate weeks.
A lot of young people won't remember those coin phones.
Yes.
I remember actually going from Switzerland to the US, for example. I did that with a friend of mine, and we were on the road. We bought a Chevy. It was a custom Chevy van, kind of, where we could sleep in the back. We bought that in Orlando, and then for 6 months we traveled and toured through the US. And I remember I had the instruction from my parents to call home regularly, but I would always do that on a return call.
Yes.
Right? Because I didn't always have enough coins
Absolutely.
to put in the machine.
Yes.
So you called, and they had to confirm that they would take your call and pay for it. Yes. And it was expensive.
Yes, I remember that.
But they told me to call.
Yes,
so.
I had to teach. So of course my parents didn't speak English, so I had to explain to them, look, if you get a call, there's a person that speaks English and you don't understand, you just say yes, please. Because I was doing the same. Yeah. So why I'm bringing that up? Because that prediction was 100% accurate. That is what actually happened over the past 20 years. But we were Cisco. We were right in the middle of it. We are the best at it. And that's all we came up with. Because of course, back in the day, it would have been impossible for us to imagine TikTok or Facebook or Twitter.
YouTube.
It would have been impossible to imagine the impact that this technology would have had on society 20 years down the line, to the point that they can influence an election. And it's impossible for you and me and everyone else right now
to see
to really come up with like the
real
amazing
dimension
things that will happen like 15, 20 years down the line.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And in terms, I mean, we now talked a bit too much almost for my liking about aXedras, but still, are there like other, like, I mean, aXedras is a supply chain management solution. Are you guys, do you have other supply chain management solutions like that? Or, I mean, the nice thing about aXedras is that if it works in the gold business, you could easily use that kind of philosophy and technology in other commodity areas, right? You could use it for cobalt, for uranium, etc. Are there other supply chain management solutions that you guys are seeing?
Yeah, I'll give you just one example, but like you say, it can be applied to other industries that have similar problems. Like I'm thinking, since we are in Switzerland and we're talking about gold bullion, so I can think of fine watches. I mean, or anything that can be counterfeited, like clothing and expensive like fashion items. But we have an example in Japan. And sorry, I'm going back to Japan because I look after Japan.
I saw that you're much more involved in Japan.
Yes, I'm much more involved. So, and they're doing an amazing job over there. And then, so they're creating these very interesting use cases. So last November, there was a new application that was released to track high-end sake. Sake is the rice.
Sure. I've had sake.
Yeah. Most people must have a sake. And
I like the hot sake.
Yeah, exactly. So, and they have like the same problem that like high-end French wine producers have, that it can be counterfeited, and so there are like fake bottles in the market with like cheap sake in it.
So brand reputation issues.
Exactly.
And
so now, and this is also interesting because it's a problem that you also have tried to address. How do you make that connection between the
physical world and digital world?
So they apply NFC like chips on the cap of the sake bottle, and these chips also have like a tiny stripe that goes down along the bottle. So when you like pop a bottle open, then you like break that like piece of the device, and then that will cause a change of state in the NFC device, and then you can.
It's been consumed.
Yes.
Interesting.
So if you think about it, this is amazing from different perspectives because again, it's kind of a provenance solution, but it's also a supply chain solution. And the distinction I make is that for the consumer, it's a provenance solution that guarantees to them that you're buying a quality. But
so does the consumer actually check whether?
And that's where it becomes interesting because I mean, in Japan they've really thought hard about these things, and I will tell you what happens in a second. But the other thing that I wanted to say is that for the company that makes the sake, is an amazing tool for tracking the bottle throughout the supply chain because they know that it's here, it's there, and then.
So it's not just an authenticity security feature, it's also an RFID chip kind of where they're tracking where it is. How expensive are those chips? Does that increase the price of the bottle?
No, they're very, very cheap.
Really?
We were talking like a fraction of a penny. I mean, it didn't add a lot to the price of the... of course, it makes more sense to do this with expensive bottles.
With more expensive bottles, sure.
So, but then we also get to the point of sale and the consumer. Of course, what can happen, and that's why I guess you asked that question, is that consumer can just pop the bottle open and then throws away the cap and drinks the sake maybe too much, and then they don't upload that change of state onto the ledger. So what now,
Bruno, maybe just why do you need blockchain for that though? Because those kinds of supply chain management solutions and warehousing and basically. Shipping tracking solutions have been around for some time, even without blockchain. Why is blockchain important for that?
That's a very good question. It's very simple because with traditional technologies like a database, it's very easy to do something that is that stays within the boundary of a company, And in that case, it's even easier than using blockchain, because using a database for keeping track of assets is much easier than using blockchain. But then, if you want to take the next step and do that integration at the industry level, then it becomes much more difficult if you use a database.
So is this an industry-wide initiative or government-sponsored?
This is an industry-wide initiative where there's a company that is providing the solution, and there are different sake producers that are
working together on that.
Okay. So if it were just one producer, they could use the database and do it.
It's that same topic again, where you want to control your confidential information.
But now if you want to have an industry-wide solution, then blockchain is much better for all the things that we have said. So in this case, if you think about it, it's not just, so for the consumer it's a provenance solution, for the company it's a logistics solution, but it's also a very interesting market analytics tool, because now they know, because in the past, after the bottles left their warehouse, maybe you know what like a retail shop ends up to, but you don't know when consumers buy it, whether they drink it, especially with fine wine. Do they drink it right away, or they wait 20 years to drink the bottle of wine?
Even just refilling, you know, I mean, basically filling up the shelves again. You know, with Japan obviously being kind of the pioneers of Kanban systems and so on. Now you actually don't even need the provider to have that kind of system. You can actually check for your client. Let's say it's a store that sells your sake. You can actually check centrally, when do we have to order or send them the next batch.
Yeah, you can do that as well.
You could do that kind of thing.
The only problem is that you need the consumer to contribute the last bit of this journey, because if they open the bottle and they don't tap their phone and upload the data, so what they have created is a kind of a lottery that gives people an incentive. So when you
I see. So the uploading of the information still requires the consumer to do something. I thought
the last bit. So
I thought the RFID chip and basically the chip, as soon as the bottle is open, it triggers that
as you
that
know,
information.
NFC can only work within a few centimeters, so there is no way for the NFC device to autonomously upload the data on the ledger. So you need the consumer to use their phone.
Yeah, but RFID is a chip that actually is location.
No, this is what they're using is NFC, the same technology that we're using for like credit cards. So, but throughout the supply chain, you can actually mandate the participants to do that, because there is value for all the participants. You can tell your distributors or your maybe also retail shop, when the bottle gets into your shop, you need to scan all the bottles, because I want to know that it was delivered, and I want to know that out of like 12 bottles.
So at least the stores protect the product to some degree.
Or maybe I want to know that out of like 20 bottles, maybe 2 got like broken or 1 got stolen. So you can mandate that. But once the bottle leaves the last store in the chain, then the consumer can either do it or don't do it, maybe don't care. Of course, some of these consumers will not do it. For example, maybe people that don't even have a phone, or maybe they're not technology oriented. But for other people, they've created like a lottery, so there is an incentive for you to actually upload the data, because if you do that, then maybe chances are that you win a case of
How far along are they in Japan with this? Is it productive?
Yeah,
so it's operational now?
Yes.
That's so awesome. I've never heard of that.
Yes.
Do you have another use case? Well, let's do one more. This is awesome.
No, actually, the two that I mentioned about Japan, the digital currency and this one, I'm very fond of these two use cases, because they are in the consumer space. So a lot of the other stuff that we're talking about is at the B2B level, which is good for like industries.
They go out to B2C.
But now it's expanding into like consumer kind of use cases.
Why do we not hear more about those kinds of use cases? You know, you're obviously, you hear about it all the time, but in general, I think in public, the only thing that is being talked about is these cryptocurrencies again, and you don't really hear about these awesome stories, which would bring back the interest and maybe also make it easier to build that trust in blockchain.
Yes, you're right, because unfortunately they get drowned into this like huge noise about all this other stuff.
Which most of it is nonsense, and so it's...
I know, but you know what? I think this doesn't just apply to this technology, but most of the news, for some reasons, I mean, people, journalists tend to pick like the bad news. Oh man, this is happening,
true.
this is worrisome, oh, it shouldn't happen. And then they
Bad
tend to
news
focus
sells.
on that.
Yeah.
If you think about any standard like news program, like 95% is bad news and maybe 5% is, well, actually, this company has come up with this nice thing.
Now, you and I, obviously, we're quite optimistic. I think the use cases and the technology has features to it that open up all kinds of opportunities. And I think over time, when I started my career after studying, I was really into a book called Corporate Reengineering by Michael Hammer, and ever since, those kinds of stories and reengineering of industries and corporations is hugely interesting. But still, we also have to, even though we're excited about the potential, what are the things that are holding us back, and where are the problems that you guys run into, because it is still a young technology, and so it's still, there's a lot of problems to solve. What are the biggest problems that you guys are running into at this point?
Yeah, that is a fundamental question, because there is something that is holding us back, all of us. It is true. It has nothing to do with the technology, but it's with the existing governance models. The reason there aren't a lot of existing models for companies that are competing with each other to come together and try to come up with a solution that can benefit the whole industry. The technology is easy. It's already there. It's been around for 10 years. We can use blockchain. But creating like an industry-wide solution where competitors get around the table and agree on the rules and the governance of this, it's really, really hard. And it's very early stages. It's a topic that I'm very passionate about, so I've done a bit of research. If we go back, there are some studies in some places. Actually, there was a woman that was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics, Eleanor Ostrom, I think it was 2009, because she studied how you can manage the commons. I mean, goods that are shared by people that don't have a formal governance structure in place. And the reason why she did that, because there was a previous view which was summarized in a short phrase, which was the tragedy of the commons. So there was of the commons. So there was a previous economist, I don't remember his name, that said there is no way that people can get together and find ways to preserve a shared resource. They would definitely destroy it. And he used examples from overgrazing in parts of Africa, where there is only water well, and so you send all your cows to the well, and everyone does that. Then the grass around that well tend to disappear because there is overgrazing, and so over time cows can't really live close to that well because there is no grass anymore. And so there is no way that you leave people to their own devices and they will manage a common shared resources.
We're all going to starve.
They will ruin it. That's why he named this like a concept or a phenomenon, the tragedy of the commons. And then Ostrom took a different view, and she said, well, actually there are so many examples of people that are managing some common resources that can be like fish stocks, or can be water for rice pads, or whatever. And they get together and they find compromise and they find ways to collaborate, although there isn't anyone that has the authority to mandate a solution, which is something that I remember came up in a conversation that you and I had a couple of months back about how do you make the gold industry adopt a standard. Well, either you take the approach of mandating it, but that can generate a backlash, because some people may say, well, actually, those are not my rules. I don't want to play by those rules, and since this is optional, I'm not going to join your industry-wide solution. I want to have a saying, and that can create a problem. Or you can try and build consensus from the ground up, which is difficult. So, to sum it up, it's we as a society, as human beings, we still don't have a easy to replicate governance model that can bring communities together and manage a common resource like a distributed ledger. And so I think the next big step for this space would be to come up with governance models for distributed applications that can actually be easily applied and understood by industry participants. That is what is holding us back, because we can't go to a single company.
Can you explain that a bit, what you mean by... So basically what you're saying is, in order for a distributed ledger to work well in a system of an industry where you have competing parties, who, however, can benefit from collaborating in certain parts of their competition, a governance of the system, a governance model of that industry can help bring them together. And what do you mean? What is the governance element that you're talking about?
Yeah. What I'm saying is that if I want to participate, I need to have some guarantees that I'm going to use a system that will stay relevant for me and is gonna be good for me, and I can participate into something that is not gonna put me at disadvantage compared to my competitors.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'm not going to sit around the same table. Because the problem that I have if I sit around the table with my competitors is that if you want to create an industry standard, maybe we go for least common denominator, and then that doesn't create an opportunity for me to have an edge against my competition. You can even think that it's going to kill the competition, which probably even gets you in trouble with antitrust regulations. So actually, this is another good point. So we don't want people to build trust, because we don't want people to collude and agree on a certain way of going to market. But with blockchain and industry-wide system of record technologies, we want to do exactly that. We want competitors to agree on using a set of standards. So it's really fuzzy. I mean, it's really kind of hard for people to wrap their heads around this problem.
But you guys are working on a governance model that would help create or solve that dilemma of, avoiding collusion, but on the other hand, creating collaboration.
So not as a company. So what we provide is only the software. The good thing about it is that given that it's software that lends itself to be used for like permissioned blockchains, well, like I said, you do KYC and it's auditable. That is a good foundation for creating governance models on top of it. But then we are not like actively promoting any. We're just promoting.
Okay, I see. So you're working on elements of the software that will then support governance models.
Yes, and we are creating awareness, me personally, but also as a company, about the fact that the next big thing that we need to resolve is like governance models for these like distributed applications.
Correct.
And I was very pleased last night because I was thinking about today's conversation with you, and I was thinking, yes, I really need to bring this up with Frank. It is important because it's really holding us back, using your words. And then when I went to bed, the last thing I did, I checked the Financial Times, and yesterday, I think it was a representative from the World Economic Forum at Davos.
Okay. Which is going on right now.
Yeah, exactly, nearby. Mm-hmm. And this person said, I'm paraphrasing, but basically said, I don't know whether it was a recommendation for the European community or more in general, we really need to focus more on DAO, Distributed Autonomous Organizations. We need to create a framework for distributed autonomous organizations. And this was the original governance model for Ethereum that I explained earlier, where things went horribly wrong, and then there was this decision to change the underlying software, and people were disappointed, and there was a fall.
I wonder how they react to that in Davos, because they definitely are more about centralist control to some degree, at least so far. I mean, because the idea of decentralized autonomous organizations is really one which does away to some degree with regulators, which and bureaucracy, which I think everyone would be a fan of, right? We need less of that.
Yeah. but we still haven't found a model that really works. So there is work being done in that space, but what I'm trying to say is that I'm pleased to know that I'm not the only person that is
You're not the only
concerned
one
about this. But yesterday at Davos, there was a big debate about that.
So looking forward, where do you see, with your knowledge of all these use cases, where do you see the next breakthrough? You know, because very often, you know, we often also compare it to the popcorn model where, you know, it pops a bit, but then at some point things really take off. Do you see any of those turning points or things that will...
Again, with my previous disclaimer in mind that I can only predict something that will pay compared to what happens, I think that what is happening in the CBDC space, central bank digital currency, might have a huge impact, can really put all this technology on a different trajectory. So as you may know, there are a lot of central banks that worked a lot on this technology to try to understand the potential, to issue their own versions of digital currencies. And I mean, I was pleasantly surprised to see the speed, the quality, and the amount of work that the central banks put, and the BIS.
Are they using Corda in some of those projects?
Yes. We actually have a big presence in the community. So we started 2 years ago with a roadshow and some industry-wide initiatives. So we created a CBDC sandbox the central banks could use to try to experiment and understand the basic fundamental concepts. Of course, it was very simple. It was the whole purpose to make it simple to focus on the different components of the solution. And then some of those banks went on to create pilot projects. And I will not name any of them, but there are some that have been really active with us. There are some that are very close to having production systems.
When you say close, when do you think they'll go?
I would say definitely within the next couple of years.
They'll go live within the next 2 years.
Yes, with some pilot project. It won't be like we're going to replace our currency with a digital version of it. So that is probably when that happens, that will change a lot of things.
What kind of parameters are they setting for that kind of CBDC? So if you typically, since you can't really talk about specifics, but is gold backing, for example, something that is included in those CBDCs?
So there are so many different ways to approach this problem that you can say anything, and my answer would be yes. Some of them are doing it their way.
They're
so in
looking
some
for
cases
those
they
options.
want to back it up with the existing currencies or other assets, and then some of them are more focusing on transmission of monetary policy, so that they can actually use programmable money, like in the sample that I made with the digital currency for local governments in Japan. Because after the pandemic, I want to give money to people, but I want to make sure that they don't spend their money on, first of all, I want to make sure that they spend it, they don't hoard it. I want to make sure that they don't buy drugs, but they buy bread, milk, or whatever. And others maybe are more thinking about people are not using cash that much anymore. So if cash disappears, it can't be just digital payments, because like I said before, it's two different things. They don't have the same attributes. So how do I still have a tool as a central bank to print money in a digital world?
So to paraphrase what you just said, it's really interesting. I mean, so one part, I guess the key question is, do you limit the amount of money that can be created with the CBDC, or do you do another fiat currency limitless type approach? And it sounds like they're actually really actively thinking about ways, algorithms, to create rules for monetary policy to at least influence it. And in some cases, maybe use gold backing as a limiting factor. And then there seems to be some cases that are more like a currency basket approach, right? Kind of like what we had with the, with the euro when it started, when it was still the ECU, the European.
Yes, I remember that.
What was that called? The European currency unit, I think, was ECU.
So, like I said, the answer is yes. all the things you just said, because again there are so many different models. So there are some common patterns that are emerging. So for example, the first step is of course to be clear about the scope of the project. So is it about wholesale digital currencies or is it about retail? So by that I mean it's just only talking about the fractional reserves that the central bank keeps from the commercial banks, so we can decide to have a digital version of that only, or you want to go all the way and provide people with digital currencies. Right. And again, for example, I know, because you can read it on newspapers, that the Riksbank, which is the oldest central bank in the world, was the first mover in this space, because back 4 or 5 years ago they saw.
Wait, which bank is that?
Riksbank in Sweden.
Okay. Yeah.
So they saw declining usage of cash in Sweden. Yeah. And for example, that wasn't the case in Italy. And but then
also here in Switzerland, the commitment to paper cash was reconfirmed very strongly. Whereas Sweden, I can tell you, Serena and I, we actually went there last year in summer, in June, and we wanted to go to this amusement park in Stockholm, but you had to already have ordered your visit online and paid for it with digital, so over with credit card or whatever. Cash, they wouldn't take any cash there. And there were several instances there where we wanted to pay in cash and you couldn't.
Yeah.
They would only take credit cards or the apps that they have on your phone. In Switzerland, we have something called Twint. I'm not sure what they have there, but
yeah. But with those, exactly. Even in London, I remember even before.
I'm concerned about that development. Yeah. I think it's a huge control grab by government if it goes down that road.
So yes, the Riksbank was concerned about that. So they started investigating the space because they had that retail problem in mind. But there are other central banks that are coming from the opposite perspective, and they say, well, actually, we don't have that problem, but we want to understand the implication of this technology. So we're thinking about maybe it can allow us to do a wholesale central bank digital currency in a more efficient way. The other thing that is a bit theoretical, but I think it's worth covering, is that the way currency is defined, which I think makes sense, is that has three main attributes. One is, so it is something that is a store of value. Maybe you've heard the story. It is a store of value. It is a unit of account. It is also a mean of transfer. So
exchange.
A mean of exchange. And so we are used to that understanding of what a currency is. Now we're also used to the fact that it's fiat currency. You can create it out of thin air.
Right.
But so we believe that that is the way it's always been, and it will also always be. But that's never the case. What we believe is always been like this. It's actually a snapshot in time.
Totally.
And it's probably a tiny slice of time. So fiat currency has been around only for 50 years, okay? Before it was based on gold. And so going forward, it may all of a sudden change and be something different. So there was at least one interesting research paper on the possibility for this different aspect to be rebundled together in different ways. Yeah. So in the future, instead of having a currency that has all three attributes, you can have currencies that are only used for specific applications and they only have one of these three attributes. And for example, and then they will be rebundled not along state boundaries, country boundaries, but along other boundaries. Maybe Facebook, maybe another social network, or maybe, and so you can imagine a world, and maybe it's already happening to a certain extent, because you can't really, I mean, if you make an effort like I did, you could buy something using Bitcoin, so you can say, yes, it is a medium of exchange. Store of value, risky. Maybe not. Unit of account, definitely not. Because even when I was buying my soup in Bitcoin, that soup had a price that was in pound, okay? Then there was an exchange rate. So, but in the future, or actually even now, there are people that are buying Bitcoins because they hope that it will go up in value. And to a certain extent, it has big swings, but it doesn't disappear.
So if you created currencies that actually maybe cover one or two, not all three, of those cash or currency aspects, that, for example, could provide governments or central banks with new tools to manage inflation, for example. Are those discussions also part of the? Are you allowed to say that? Are those discussions part of the discussions around the topic of CBDC? Because I've never heard of that. That's really interesting.
Actually, this paper was. I mean, I may be wrong, but maybe I will provide the link that you can publish together with the video.
That's really interesting.
It might have been. I've read a lot of stuff by the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements.
Right.
This might have been one of their papers. They are really, like I said, they're doing a phenomenal job. They're really looking into this very closely. They're thinking about all the potential ramifications, because they have realized that having something that is like, again, going back to the beginning, electronic cash can be so disruptive and can create so many good things, but it can also pose so many powerful threats to the...
I mean, the big picture implication that comes to mind right now, I mean, if we look at where we are right now, we're in a phase where, at least since World War II, the US dollar has been the trade and reserve currency of the world. The US has benefited hugely from that. And now suddenly there's a lot of talk about different kinds of currencies, including the BRICS gold-backed currency, which also could be facilitated even more via a digital type of application. What you just said, I mean, you could envision a completely new and different system moving forward. Is that something you guys see in the discussions? Because right now we're in a phase where America is a bit with its back to the wall, and politically, this rift between the red bloc and the blue bloc, let's say, and Europe kind of being undecided without a strategy in the middle, is becoming more intense, and part of that intensity is around the currency. There's other things, obviously resources are always at play, from oil now also to semiconductors and so on, but the question of who owns the best currency is a huge question which will change our world. And,
absolutely, and of course you will not get adoption just by releasing a technology, so it has to do with like the amount of power that you can project into the world. But it's probably what you just said is a very interesting comment, that one way of looking at it is that probably explains what is happening right now with CBDCs, where I give you this bit of information. The US...
You've made me so curious.
Okay.
I have a lot of questions, but I know you can't talk about them.
So the US has probably been the central bank that has done the least in that space, while China is probably one of the most advanced, and they are talking about the digital yuan every day. Mm-hmm. That tells you something. Mm-hmm. The US, I mean, what they have created is serving them so well that any changes...
Everyone else wants a piece of that.
Yes. Any changes for the US can probably go the wrong way. Mm. But for a challenger of the existing, like, let's call it status quo, and again, I'm not passing any judgment, I'm just trying to make people...
No, I think it's a reality that everyone at this point is realizing that there's there's a new kid on the block, and it's a powerful one, and there's a new block being created around the Chinese advance. And China has lots of problems of its own, so it's not clear where this game will go yet. But there is definitely that competition, and currency is a huge piece of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's, I think we are living exciting times.
So the, I think, you know, we're actually, this has been really great, and I have more questions, Bruno, but I think we're running out of time,
Okay.
and maybe we can do this again another time. This was really good, and I know offline we'll be discussing some more. But is there anything else that you wanted to bring up in the conversation that we haven't touched at this point?
No, just I mean a general observation or a recommendation, which is it is true that there's a lot of noise out there, but I mean in the really I'm serious. I'm not kidding. It's if you think about money is such a fundamental aspect of society. It goes back like to millennia, and there hasn't been fundamental change in the technology. There have been some adjustments. If you think about going from like shells to like copper to paper, it's an evolutionary thing. But with digital, again, the fact that you can decouple the different aspects of a currency, you can rebundle them along different lines, not like a country base. I mean, we are probably living at an inflection point where I think that the fact that there is this technology out there is really good. It has potential to good things, also bad things. We will have to deal with them. So that is one aspect. Money is fundamental, and it is important that there is this change that is happening. The other one is that sometimes we are so tired of all these arguments between polarized factions that we tend to like shy away from getting into political conversations. But I think we need to think about where we're going, because there are too many things that are coming together. AI, the fact that we can be tracked, everything we do is being constantly tracked. If you think about payments or money getting into the picture. So I think that, as a society, we should sit down and think a little bit. Okay, we need to understand where we are going, because we can't just let it happen without thinking too much about it, because we can end up in a bad place. And blockchain with digital cash, electronic cash, will play a role in this. All these things, we need to understand what is happening, because we need what I call an escape hatch. I mean, if these things go wrong, I hope that we will have a form of cash, which I'm fine using, like shells, that will allow me to keep buying food if for some reason, maybe a big mistake made by AI, I'm cut off from the financial system.
I agree 100%. I think, I mean, there's a lot of topics that would require proper discourse, right? Instead of screaming and ideology. But when it comes to money, I agree with you that money has been and continues to be a huge facilitator and enabler and it can be a huge facilitator for a free economy. The problem we see today is that too much power has been put in the hands of governments to create and play and manipulate that money, which has created a situation where we're now, in front of mountains of debt and deficits, and huge government, with the public part of economies hugely oversized. France is just one example of that. The state kind of crowding out the private sector of the economy, and so a money that would be less manipulated, or at least CBDC type money that is limited in terms of how much can be. So kind of going back to more the gold backing type approach, at least with some of the money, maybe for payments for people. Those discussions are really important. I agree.
Yeah, and no matter what side you take in the debate, I think that I really like the word you use, discourse. We should really all make an effort to participate. and in the discourse about these things.
It's just, I mean, there I'm really, I mean, I'm usually a very optimistic person, Bruno, but if I currently look at the world, I'm really frustrated with the quality of politicians and journalists that we have. You know, if you look at the people that we have that are supposedly leading the Western world and other parts of the world as well, it's quite frustrating. And there's not much discourse there. The media jumps, just like you said, on bad news, and everything has become extremely dogmatic. And I feel like common sense only comes back in crisis and pain, especially when you've gone through so many years of progress and wealth, you know, building. And at this point, the best example is the Ukraine war, which you know, is a tragedy. But at the same time, that war has created a situation where suddenly in Europe there's more pragmatic and realistic discussions going on about things like self-sufficiency, you know, self-defense, energy policies, and so on. And I would love to see the same kind of conversation around money. I just doubt that it's, you know, the banking system is so deeply entrenched and it's become such a powerful tool. Yeah, it would be good to discuss
yes.
that.
And I understand
and second guess it. Yeah.
And it is hard for people. I understand that. Actually, there was a stand-up comedian that put it in an amazing way. It was about crypto, and he said, "Crypto is everything you don't understand about money, combined with everything you don't understand about computers." Which is an amazing way to put it. So my message is, don't get discouraged, try to participate, and we are potentially going through an important transition. So there is like a fundamental discussion that we need to have about these things as a society.
And the first step, really, I think, I really like the idea of the discussion, but the first step is even just education.
Yes.
You know, educate yourself so that you really understand
exactly
blockchain technology and money and so on, because there is a lot of potential change in that. I agree 100%.
Yes.
So we're getting close to closing. Again, this was great. I always enjoy our conversations. To close, I always ask a question, which is a big question. I don't know if you want to answer, but in your, you know, and just leaving the world of blockchain and so on, where do you see the biggest opportunities and where do you see the biggest challenges today?
In terms of like society, economics, or
you can pick.
So there is one thing that I'm struggling with. So maybe it's big in my mind. Maybe it's not that relevant for other people. But I think that the impact that the internet has. There's one negative impact that I believe the internet has had that is changing us as a society, which is the fact that we are constantly immersed in our bubble, where we live with our small circle of friends 24/7. If I look at people around me in the street, on the bus, or in the office, those people are not really with me. They are with their friends. And it is a small set of friends that they carry with them all the time because they have them in their pocket. And so people have completely lost, I believe, awareness of what is happening around them, very close to them. The people around them, the environment around them. I think this is something that is something that Bruno keeps moaning about, but it is not relevant at all. But I think it is.
I think it's very relevant.
Actually,
even relevant in the context of what you said before, in terms of we should have a discourse.
Yeah.
People are not talking to each other anymore.
Yes.
If you ride the train or the bus, everyone's looking into their damn little phone.
Yes.
And they're in that bubble.
Yes.
And that creates a situation where that discourse does not happen.
Yes.
And you start to kind of be in that bubble, not being aware of, you know, all the good people around you.
Yeah, lack of awareness. And this is a problem, I believe, again, not because I'm feeling it, but because as a species, as an animal, if you will, we have something that has allowed us to develop intelligence, which is like that kind of social awareness, that way of interacting with the people that are around us, that has allowed us that has put us on a trajectory that over time brought us all these advances in healthcare, and so with this behavior that is being enabled by this misuse of the internet, we are really going against that fundamental aspect of being human, which I think that potentially can create a huge problem for society, because we risk stopping being a functional society. And we already seen that with the polarization on social media and all these things. So I think that it all starts from what is happening very close to us. And if we can somehow fix that, then that effect will expand and cover other aspects of society.
I agree. And we didn't look at our phone once.
Yes.
So as a recipe to have good discourse, put your phones aside and have these kinds of conversations.
Yes, absolutely.
Bruno, thank you so much.
No, thank you.
This was awesome. This was fun.
Amazing. Thank you.
We might have to make a two-piecer out of it.
It
was
fine.
much longer, but that's now Serena's job.
Or a series. Yes, of course.